2 American hostages have been released and are safe. We had reporting that they were going to be released, but we wanted to wait until we knew they were in safe hands, and we have been told that that has happened. They've been released now 2 weeks after the horrific terror attack in southern Israel. The 2 women, a mother and daughter, and you see them up on the screen right there. That is an image from the Associated Press. Their names are Judith Raanan, she is 59 years old, and Natalie Raanan, who is 17 years old.
Finally, a little bit of good news today with Hamas releasing 2 American hostages who were abducted during the terrorist group's brutal attack in Israel on October 7th. Now, the release is the result of negotiations, ongoing negotiations between Qatar and Hamas. In fact, Qatar is known to engage in these types of deals, these types of negotiations. The story is still developing, so the real intentions behind releasing these 2 American hostages remain unclear, but here's what we do know at the moment. So 59-year-old Judith Raanan and her 17-year-old daughter Natalie were first released to the Red Cross. After that, they were taken to an Israeli military base to be reunited with family. Now, the Raanans are not from Israel. They're actually Americans from Chicago, Illinois, to be exact. Ben Raanan, the brother of Natalie Raanan and son of Judith Raanan, said his mom and sister were in Israel for a relative's birthday when they were taken hostage. Hamas said, though, in a statement that the hostages, a mother and daughter who are both Americans, were released for humanitarian reasons and to prove to the American people and the world that the claims made by Biden and his fascist administration are false and baseless. Now, I want to be clear about something. There are certainly some issues I've had with Biden's messaging on the ongoing war. I would venture to say my issues are very different from the issues that Hamas has with Biden. We all saw what Hamas carried out. Hamas militants not only kidnapped innocent civilians on October 7th, they raped women, they burned entire families alive, they killed 260 people at a music festival. And so when they say that they're engaging in a humanitarian effort, that is laughable to say the least. Now, there are some reports indicating that Judith, that's the mother, was suffering from poor health. And so it's obviously costly and difficult to hold nearly 200 people hostage. So that could be part of the reason why they let these 2 Americans go. But they're still hostages, in Gaza, suffering as a result of what Hamas did, probably terrified considering the endless, bombing campaign that's taking place in the Gaza Strip, the lack of food, the lack of fuel. It's just a complete and utter disaster. So I don't really give Hamas any credit, but I am very happy to share with you all that at least 2 people have been released. Brett, what are your thoughts?
2 people back. They say there's about new figures from Israel say that there's about 200 hostages still being held in Gaza. More than 20 of them are under the age of 18. Between 10 and 20 are over the age of 60. This is the reports of 2 getting returned safely. They do believe there are a lot of them still alive in Gaza, and as people navigate how to communicate to each other and to the world about this. I think we all have kind of gravitated toward we should be on the side of peace, and we should be on the side of making sure that innocent civilians are not caught up in the entirety of this, no matter what side of the divide they live on or whatever when they support. And so this is good news in the arc of people getting back to where they are from and getting out of harm's way. And there's still a lot more work to do.
Absolutely. I was really happy to see some polling today from Data for Progress. Now, caveat is this is a more progressive polling institution, but nonetheless, their poll indicates that 66% of Americans want a ceasefire. And look, I do think that most Americans do want a ceasefire. I think most Americans want to protect civilians on both sides. I believe most Americans saw what happened to Israeli citizens, civilians as absolutely disgusting and brutal, and they condemned it. And now they're seeing what's happening to Palestinian civilians, and they feel the same way. And I agree with you, Brett. I mean, we need to get to a point. Diplomacy is a weird word because I actually agree with Israel wanting to root out Hamas. The question is, what does that look like? And how do you do that while preventing as the loss of as many civilian lives as humanly possible, and that's a difficult thing to do. But I haven't really seen a lot of caution so far from the Israeli government. I've seen a lot of retaliation. The mass evacuations of people, more than 1 million people from the north to the south, the bombing campaigns. It's just been absolutely brutal. And we need to get to a point where there's an actual strategy in place to accomplish what the Israeli government wants to accomplish with Hamas, while also keeping in mind that war crimes are a problem and we should avoid them as much as possible.
Right. And all these decisions are made in a timeline relative to when like the beginning of this was, what the nature of the initial attack that precipitated the ensuing escalation of violence, what that was, and the dance that you do around it. Like everybody should be on the side of not endangering civilians. Everybody should, as time progresses from the initial incident, be more on the side of a ceasefire. I just don't see anything against that. A lot of new polling came out saying that overall support for this kind of a thing, for sending troops in, or delivering weapons and supplies, as I think it was phrased in a recent poll, was pretty much 50-50 at 48, so it was under 50%. But then when you think about what it takes public opinion wise for America to actually get out of wars in which it is engaged, do a really good job, I would say, for the wars that we've gotten into, about getting public support back home. So usually we get into a war with more support than we have in this one, and we leave with much less support than we have in this one right now. But the dance that a lot of the people do is a dance of messaging and a dance of practicality. And the dance of messaging, well, you see a lot of people look at these polls and say, all right, it's very clear we have a path forward, and they'll just cherry pick polls and say what that path should be. And there's some people that will be navigating. We'll get to a story later when everybody is trying to weigh in at the State Department to kind of sway the way that our foreign policy should go. That is a dance of practicality and messaging as well. So I think right now it is important to note that the vast majority of people in America, if we're having a discussion about American support for this kind of thing, the vast majority, the America's kind of split 50-50 on whether we should do it. But that gap widens when you narrow down to what specifically folks are supporting.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It really is, because I think that whether it's intentional or unintentional, I think for some folks, it tends to be intentional in conflating, lack of support for Israel rooting out Hamas and a ceasefire. And I don't think those two things are the same. I think calling for a ceasefire makes sense, especially when we need to understand, like, what is the strategy in fighting Hamas, right? Like, you hear all of this, rhetoric coming from the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, about how they need to crush and destroy Hamas. Okay, but how do you propose to do that, right? And I was listening to an interview with Matt Duss just today. He was a longtime foreign policy advisor to Bernie Sanders. He's actually a lot more hawkish than I expected on this issue. But nonetheless, he shed some light on some concerns within the federal government in regard to a lack of strategy, like a strategy in terms of getting Hamas. And so I think you see it. I think you see it in the bombing campaign that's taking place right now. They've been saying that a ground invasion is imminent. Every morning I wake up and that's what the headlines say. They haven't done a ground invasion yet. I am concerned about the ground invasion, leading to the loss of more lives. But if you're looking to specifically get Hamas, you need to beef up your intelligence. And I think that's the area where the United States could potentially be more helpful than just supplying them with endless, missiles.
When it comes to, if you look at all the countries in that region, Israel by far, like by everybody's estimation, is the best at intelligence, information, and technology. So that is it. And usually everybody, when you read reports on these in the wake of it, everybody already has a list of what they want to hit. And then they just bring it out and they say, how many of these can we hit before we lose support? And in what way can we do it? And how into it are you, BB? And then that's how they just perform their actions after that. And so
they've killed like 6 Hamas fighters so far. And like a ton of Palestinian civilians. I mean, the figures differ. This morning there were some figures saying about 3,700, others say 4,000 civilians. So at what cost, right? So obviously their strategy is disproportionately hurting civilians as opposed to taking out the Hamas fighters that they, want to take out. So, and look, the intel, sure. I mean, I was more willing to believe that before, Hamas was able to break through those barriers and commit the terrible terror attacks that they did. How did they miss that? What was the intel failure there?
I mean, from what I've seen about analysis of the situation, and seeing it a lot doesn't mean it's all true, but just like what people are saying, some of it is that the analysis with Benjamin Netanyahu just didn't believe it. He thought he was doing so well with Gaza, and his focus was on expanding settlements in the West Bank, which is, I cannot wrap my head around why or how you would want to do that as just someone going in and just being like, this isn't your house anymore, like in 2023.
Yeah.
But he was so focused on that, and that, certain analyses are just like, he just didn't think it was real, didn't think it was thought it was a military exercise or a head fake or something like that. And he gauged it wrong. And the big calculation, I think a lot of people who deal with this, and you hear it in the discourse of politicians, you have people who have been like, I've been in Congress for 70 years. And in that 70 years, this kind of thing, maybe a week, maybe 4 weeks, maybe 12 weeks, this happens all the time. Is it just an attack, and then Israel, does attacks back, and that happens, and then they feel like they've hit the amount they're willing to do, and then they stop, and then there's some kind of ceasefire? Is it that, or is this, when I hear to get 1.5 million people out of Gaza City, I am terrified. You just shouldn't be saying that or doing that. That's the scary stuff.
Definitely. And, I was horrified at what happened on October 7th. And I mean, I talked about it on the show, incredibly disgusted by anyone cheering it on, absolutely disgusted by anyone either cheering it on or minimizing it. These are innocent civilians that need to be protected. It is not that complicated. And I see it happening on a mass scale in Gaza. And it's really depressing, incredibly scary. Humanitarian aid still has not entered the Gaza Strip yet. There have been delays because of the Israeli government's concerns that the trucks carrying the humanitarian aid might contain, weapons, and so they want to check every single truck. But there's always something, right? Either the border gets bombed, or now there's this new thing with them concerned about, UN trucks carrying humanitarian aid, hiding weapons. And time is of the essence. It's been quite some time since they've had any fuel, any water. Medical supplies are running out. It is just a dire situation on the ground in Gaza. And the people who are harmed the most are obviously the Gazan civilians.